Hey, folks, welcome to the Accessible Hunter podcast. I'm Greg Trainer along with my co host Mike Hudson, and we're really blessed today to have a guest on that we've been following for a long time, Mr. Tim Spike Davis. And Tim is a cartoonist, he's an author, he's a mechanic, he's a man of God, and I've always enjoyed everything he puts out online. And we're going to talk with Tim in just a minute. But first, Mike, what's going on in South Carolina, brother?
Hey man, just living the dream, brother. That we're starting to get more fall weather. It's getting to be that time of year where all the deer are moving, the leaves are starting to fall. We got a little cool breeze. I'm just getting ready, and we've already started some archery in certain parts of the state. But I know you're an archery guy, dude. And you're chomping to get out there this weekend. I'm ready to get that long gun talking, man. And
Oh,
we're gonna get after it here shortly.
I got to tell you, Mike, I had a ground blind up in the back of my orchard for, a couple months since April
Yeah.
spring turkey. Well, it was looking pretty shabby. So my wife and I decided to put up a different blind this weekend because our archery season starts on
On
Saturday.
Saturday, yeah.
So my wife's putting up this tide weed blind, and I don't know if you guys ever do anything with these hub blinds or not, but
Yeah.
she's 5'4", and she said if her arms were a little bit longer and she was a little bit stronger, it wouldn't have been such a struggle. But she got it up, and while we were putting up this ground blind, guys, you won't believe it, but we had four deer all around us, just looking at us putting up this new ground blind, and we were laughing and cutting up and saying, "Man, I hope their big buck comes on Saturday," because they were all four does. But when you're surrounded by deer and you're putting up your ground blind, it's not a bad weekend. And
Nah.
Tim, we sure appreciate having you on the podcast this morning and taking your time to be
Sure.
with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm honored that you guys are having me and that you reached out. And like I said earlier, anytime somebody invites me to do some talking, I'm a talker. So I'm always game for that. So I appreciate it.
Man, I've been following you for I know years with your cartoons, and your hunting cartoons are always like spot on with the coyote hunting and things. And you also do a lot of well, I wouldn't say necessarily religious cartoons, but Christian cartoons that make us kind of think. And I read your last book, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, but it really touched me, the stories of your life, and let me get to know a little bit about you personally. And if you don't mind, would you kind of introduce yourself a little bit and let people know that may not have followed you in the past a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, my name is Tim Spike Davis. Um, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which is probably a city that would denounce me as a citizen now because they're totally, it's like the most hippie granola animal
Right.
tree hugging, rights. They're very. I didn't realize that until I moved out of Boulder. What a crazy town it was. But moved to Chicago. I left home and dropped out of high school when I was 16, and was kind of doing some just that prodigal son kind of stuff, just really burning up a lot of bridges. And a friend of
Right.
mine said, "Oh, I'm going to Chicago. Let's go check out this Christian community." And I literally had no. I was raised in the church, but I wasn't a follower, and I really didn't have any options. So I thought, sure, I'll try it out, and I thought I'd be there for a month. And 40 years later, I'm still in Chicago, and God had different plans. And when I got to Chicago, I was 16. I saw the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life, and it's funny what the power of women will do. And I chased her around for about 4 years, and she finally decided to give me some attention. And eventually, we got married. And like I said, we've been here for 40 years in this Christian community, and that I work at. And one of the interesting things about how the hunting thing happened was at the time in the community when I first joined, Cheese People, the community that's the name of it, owned several pieces of property. One in southern Missouri, near Doniphan, Missouri. They owned some other properties, and there were some pastors in the community at the time who were kind of like the Duck Dynasty guys, like old hippies who long beards and had grown up in rural America, and they kind of started teaching me how to hunt and fish. And it was ironic, and it just kind of shows you God's sense of humor that I leave Colorado moved to Chicago, and that's when I get into hunting and fishing. It's kind of,
Right.
you can't script this stuff. It doesn't make any sense. And I didn't grow up in a hunting or fishing family in Boulder, and then I come to Chicago, and there's guys who are handing me fishing poles and guns, and like, try this out and see this. When we're on these pieces of property, and I the hunting aspect at first didn't start off real well with me, and at the time, owning any type of firearm in Chicago was very difficult in the 80s and 90s. Um, so I got more into fishing, started doing a lot of fishing, and became really obsessed with fishing. And about late 90s, early 2000s, I actually just, by bizarre coincidence, a guy handed me a book on how to build primitive bows,
Right.
like wooden bows, archery. And so I just got dove head into that, making wooden bows, archery, and of course, deer hunting followed pretty quickly behind that, because it was making these bows. Like, oh, I want to shoot at something. So we had this giant piece of property in west central Illinois, and my wife and I had a little cabin out there, and we'd go down for weekends and different stints down there. And a lot of my guys in the community at the time were into hunting. They all hunted with compounds bows, and they're like, "You're not going to kill anything with that little kid's bow, little stick bow." And my second year, I got a buck, and it was nothing you could ever, uh, brag about, or a little 6 pointer. But I shot a buck right through the heart, 30 yards, with this stick bow I had made. And,
Wow.
it was quite an accomplishment for me. And, um, they that kind of progressed into then also wanting to learn how to hunt coyotes, which
Yeah.
I knew there was no way. And I know there's guys who do it all the time, but anytime I'd ever draw on a coyote, by the time I got to full draw, that coyote had
He's
vaporized.
gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, like literally, like super, like human, like super powers. It was just like, where'd he go? Like they just vaporized.
You're right.
A deer will stop and look at you for a second. So that progressed into me getting into a 223 rifle, bolt action rifle, and getting into shooting firearms back again. And eventually got a shotgun, and just kind of opened up. It was early 2000s, started or opening up more into getting. It was kind of funny because a lot of guys who get into primitive archery have done all the gun stuff, and they progress into wanting more of a challenge.
Right.
I
Right.
started
Right.
off with the hardest, was with the primitive bows, and then I started moving more towards rifles and shotguns. And
Sure.
um, but right around that same time, and I didn't really, the guys who started me off hunting earlier in my life weren't around at this point. So a lot of the stuff I was doing, I was having to learn the hard way. And
Mm.
I was doing a lot of sitting around in the woods, not being very successful. And when you're sitting in the woods that long, and most hunters know, it's the grind of just sitting and waiting when you're doing ambush style hunting. I would start thinking about like what's going on in this deer's life, or what's going on in this coyote's life, or what's going on in these different animals' lives that I hunt. And I've always drawn cartoons. I've since I was a little kid. And my mom has cartoons from when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And my mom and my brother were more trained artists. My brother taught graphic arts in high school for years. My mom was like a landscape artist, and I was the cartoonist. So I would just naturally doodle around on some of these ideas about what these animals were going through, and just goofing off, just way to pass time. And buddy of mine who was a professional cartoonist at the time said, "Oh, you should send some of that stuff into some magazines and see what they think." And I was like, "Dude, no way. I already got enough rejection in my life. I don't need
Right.
more.
Right.
I don't need anyone else telling me I suck. I just." So he kept bugging me to do it, and it was actually some of more of my faith-based cartoons that he was interested in me sending into a magazine at the time. It was called Christianity Today, and it was, I think, the
Yeah.
largest publication, a Christian publication in America. And so on a lark, I just sent a couple in, and shocked that they actually accepted a few and bought some for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, this actually works, and I kind of got it's like those guys who go out and hunt in the woods the first time they get something the first time they out hunt. I had beginner's luck with cartooning because several publications just bought stuff right away, and I thought, oh, this is really easy.
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
found out that through the years it's not as easy.
Sure.
Um, and also I got into drawing and sending in cartoons at a time when um, traditional publishing magazines and books and stuff were going through a difficult phase of digital, the whole digital transferring, and a lot of them were looking at cartoons as a little bit more of a extra thing that it's still difficult to this day to convince editors and publishers that cartoons are a viable part of any publication,
Right.
which is odd to me because some of the most long-lasting magazines in the history of the United States have always had cartoons in them, so it's just always an
Mhm.
interesting. But around 2010, 2011, I was really getting into predator hunting as far as just becoming obsessed with it, and I had yet to even get a coyote. That was my number one thing. I'd hear them on our property. I'd see their scat. I'd even see them when I didn't have a gun on me. That's a classic situation, like Greg was saying earlier. If you're putting up a ground blind and you got deer all around you, it's like
Yep.
anytime I didn't have a gun on me, there was coyotes walking, and my wife would look at me like, "You can't kill one of these things." Like I can chuck a rock at that sucker, and
Right.
I'm sure we could get him.
Exactly.
And, the minute you put a gun in your hand, I had a cartoon I did years ago, and it was called Gundar instead of radar. It was
Right.
animals know when you've got a bow in your hand or you got a gun. And I've had so many
Yep.
farmers come tease me like, dude, you can't kill us. Every time I'm out plowing my field, these things are running behind the tractors, and
Yep.
Yeah.
um,
Yep.
so I just randomly sent two cartoons that I drew up pretty quickly to this magazine, Predator Extreme magazine. It's the largest, predator hunting magazine in the United States. And the assistant editor at the time, his name is Mark Olis, wrote me back and said, "Oh, we love these. Do you think you could provide enough cartoons for us to?" At the time, they were doing 6 magazines a year. Do you think you have enough to do? And I don't know if I lied or just bluffed, but I said sure. I
Yeah.
mean, I only had those two. I'd given them, I didn't have anything in the larder, So I was like, oh. But if I told them no, I knew there was no opportunity. But if I said
Right.
sure, we'll figure it out, and it was such a great experience. And working with Mark we worked together for several years. He is the editor of the magazine, and that kind of took off for me as far as most of the people who follow me on Instagram and Facebook know me through the hunting cartoons I
Hmm.
do. And, um, for me, totally shocked and surprised. And I think it's funny, a lot of people find out in the hunting community, like they'll love these cartoons that I draw. But then they're shocked when they find out these are drawn by a guy who lives in the inner city of Chicago.
Right.
That
Right.
doesn't make any sense to them. And then they find out, oh, this guy also works in an intentional Christian community. It's like, seems kind of strange and odd. So, again, it's back to one of those hilarious things like you can't script these things. When, God sets you on your journey. Um, there's a lot of things that just don't make sense to most people. And
Right.
I just sit there and figure, okay, well, Lord, what's the next crazy adventure you're going to have me do? And Greg had asked me in the questionnaire, like, what are some of the things that inspire me with my cartooning? And I was laughing with Mark Olis, my editor. I said, I'm so bad because I really didn't know anyone who was coyote hunting in my circle.
Right.
Any questions I'd have, people just kind of like, yeah, I just see them when I'm driving down the road, with my truck, or wherever. And like the idea of actually like calling one in, like targeting and calling one in was I did every horrible mistake you could possibly imagine.
Sure.
And I told Mark, I said, most of my cartoons are really birthed out of pain and suffering. It's like if
Yeah.
I was
Right.
if I ever get good at coyote hunting, my cartooning might start to diminish,
Right,
because
right.
most of my material is based off, and I think that that's what actually resonated with a lot of people
Hmm.
who are into hunting. And I found a pattern that most people who think they're really good at hunting don't get my cartoons. They don't
Yeah.
get it. It's not. But the people who've actually suffered and the people who question what on earth they're doing with their life and
Right.
what's brought them to this state, and why are they dumping so much money into this and time, and they get those cartoons. They get that idea of
Absolutely.
the suffering and so for me, and that's really how I've actually lived most of my life, whether it's hunting, my Christian walk. I'm not the type of person who's going to tell you how much I got it together or how spiritual I am. Greg earlier, and Greg introduced me as a man of God. It makes me feel uncomfortable because, it's like, I wish I could brag about how awesome of a Christian I am, but, as
Right.
a person who's followed Christ for 40 years, you know, I'm still just waking up every day. Lord, have mercy and grace on me. But really,
Absolutely.
so
And
and I think that most of my humor is based out of that sense of not quite getting it or reaching your that, and I think most people that resonates with them if they're honest. So
That's the thing about it, Tim, is if we're living by faith, we have to understand that we're not, it's all about grace.
absolutely,
We're never going to suffice. We're never going to mount up, whether it's getting in the woods and trying to chase these predators that are very
yep,
good at their game and they're always
yeah,
going to
yeah,
find us out, or
yep,
it's trying to live the right life and we just can't do it. But
yeah.
Tim, I got a question, and most people won't know it. I'm just curious. Where'd you come up, and where'd you get the nickname Spike?
Well, I when I was younger and I first moved from Boulder to Chicago, I wasn't really into the punk scene, and I had my hair up in spikes. I'll send you guys some pictures if you guys want to post it on the
heck yeah.
podcast. But I used to have 4 or 5 inch spikes coming off my head, and when I was a kid, I was just telling somebody this the other day. When I was a kid, having straight spiky hair was super cool, and my hair naturally is very curly, and if I tried to use any type of um, products they sold in the store, like Dip Doo. I don't even know if they have that stuff anymore. My hair would just curl up. I'd end up looking like Michael Bolton instead of,
Right.
Sid Vicious. So I think I was like 12 or 13. Out of pure frustration, I just got my a big bottle of Elmer's glue my mom had in her art supplies, and I just Elmer glued my hair out straight in spikes. And I mean, my parents were so distraught, but I would put my hair up in spikes, and when I moved to Chicago, one of the pastor's wives saw me, and she was like, "Hey, Spike," she just kind of derogatorily teasing me, kind of messing
Right.
with me. Um, she thought it was funny, and I at the time no one had ever called me Spike up to that point, but it stuck. And Tim Davis has got to be one of the most vanilla, boring names you could ever have. No one's going to remember Tim Davis, but they remember Spike. That sticks out. And there's probably a zillion Tim Davises, but there's only one Tim Spike Davis. So,
There you go.
um, and so it's just kind of stuck. And um, I, would rather just people call me Spike, but I don't care. I mean, I've been called worse. I've had people call me things, I can't say on the air, but
Understood.
Yeah.
yeah. So, and and of course, however many years later, I'm bald, so I don't have any spikes on top of my head.
Hey, welcome to the company.
Yeah, and what the funny thing is that, and it never really stuck as a nickname, but the area I live in, there's quite a bit of gang activity and stuff. And one day, I was walking down the street, and one of these gang guys was yelling out, "Hey, Red Jaw!" When I first grew out my beard, Greg will appreciate this. My beard was bright red naturally,
Right.
a red beard, and these guys would call me Red Jaw, just as a nickname. Hey, Red Jaw, and when I was coming out with my first website for cartooning, they were like, you got to come up with an original name. So I have two kind of categories for my cartooning. All of my hunting and fishing cartoons is under Scattered Thoughts Cartoons, which was what Predator Extreme put the column under, Scattered Thoughts. And then anything that's faith based or anything that doesn't fall under hunting and fishing is Red Jaw Cartoons. So
Okay.
um, people ask me occasionally, where did Red Jaw come from? Because now my beard is white. And it's like, well, when I was younger,
My my
I had a
my
red jaw.
my beard's
So
following you, Spike.
yeah,
I
yeah,
have a lot more gray in mine anymore, and my wife just trimmed it up last night. I was looking kind of bushy, and she said, "Hey, you need to trim your beard." And when your wife says you need to trim your beard, what do,
yeah,
boys? You trim your
Yeah.
yeah.
beard. So
You trim the beard. That's
I
exactly right.
I was
Yeah,
wondering how you come up with the red jaw because that's you know one of your two cartoon books, and uh,
yeah.
how do you decide which cartoons make it into your books? Because you do so many great ones. I don't know which ones you would ever not make the cut. They're all
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
incredible.
Well, there's a pile of them that so my wife is my first editor.
There you go.
Yeah, she is the I'll draw cartoons and cartooning to me is like journaling, what people would consider journaling. Like I wake up in the morning, I have a blank piece of paper, and I just am sometimes just drawing something that's on my heart or my mind, and there's times where my wife will see what I've drawn and she's like, look me in the eyes. This is never, ever going into public. Like, we just, people can't handle this kind of,
Humor.
and yeah. And she's like, we'd have to change our names and our address if this ever got public, and so when, during like the whole height of insanity of COVID and lockdown, all that stuff, and of course Chicago, I live in a communist city in a communist state. Um, they were very strict, and my wife and I were in our apartment and had a lot of time on our hands. And Amy was like, "We should probably compile all of your cartoons and come out with a hunting." And the first one was the Scattered Thoughts cartoon, and we were kind of trying to think about how many cartoons I'd have available to do, and I thought maybe a couple hundred, and because I was literally just putting them in boxes in his office, and we pulled down, I think I had 900 cartoons, hunting and fishing cartoons,
Wow.
Wow.
and we just literally sat in our apartment and had an A pile, a B pile, and a C pile. And D pile was, I literally do not even know what I was thinking when I drew this cartoon. Like, I don't drink or do drugs, but I still like, what on earth? I don't even know what this means, But so A pile, my wife and I would go through them. And my wife is, she taught high school English for 20 years. She's very different from me in the sense that her sense of humor, and it can be frustrating at times because there's times where she just doesn't get stuff I've drawn or understand what the
Right.
deal is. And she's not in, she was actually ironically raised in a hunting and fishing home in Alabama, but she doesn't do it. She'll go with me if I ask her to come along, but she's not really into that. But so she'll go through the cartoons, and I figured A pile was, if she laughed at it, then it would reach a wider audience, And
Right.
there are
Right.
some that from the B pile that made in there that she didn't get because it was just, there's certain cartoons and jokes that you and I get as either as hunters or as men. Um, and so we just painstakingly went through all of these, and we narrowed it down to like 300 and something. I can't remember. It was 340 through something, 380 cartoons. Kept all the ones that were, or most of the ones that were rejected, and then another pile. So there, one day there may be a rejection book, but
Yeah. Yeah.
inappropriate, but they so, and then we sent that off, and thankfully I had some friends of mine who are more digital savvy and tech savvy and helped me out with like downloading files and setting up the books and stuff, and really grateful for them. And I was overwhelmed with the amount of response I got from people. I sold out. I had 100 books that I purchased. Like I bought from a printing company to sell myself,
Right.
and within the first 24 hours, those sold out, which I was shocked. And there was it was also the bummer with that was right at the time when the U.S. Post Office was going through one of its worst phases of delivery. And I was at the post office every day, mailing out books and still doing a job and, everything else. But, I was super supportive. One of the great things about having people who follow you on Facebook and Instagram is, they know that you're not out there scamming people. They know who you
Right.
are.
Sure.
And I had a buddy of mine down in, I'd never met him in person up until I did this book, but he was a guy who lived about 2.5 hours south of Chicago as a farmer, and he ordered my book. And 3 months later, he's like, it's never come. And so I literally just got in the car with my wife and we just drove down there. And he was super
Wow.
chill about it. He wasn't like angry or upset, but he was shocked when he sent me a pin to where he was just in a field, and I got out, walked across the field, and handed him his book. And I was like, it's more important to me to make sure you get the book than it was. I'm just the type of person I can't sleep at night knowing somebody's giving me
Right.
money. I can't provide them the service that they've wanted. But,
Sure.
um, and, that resonates a lot too, because that's a very rural mindset.
100%. Yep.
One of the things that has been interesting to me, Greg had alluded to the fact of how do I pick? It's what's always intrigued me is that, of course, the audience that's followed me is a majority of the people, 90+% of the people who follow my hunting cartoons will be people who would fall into more of the rural conservative worldview.
Right. Right.
And
Which is weird
wonderful.
coming from Chicago, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've had people who I've stayed with and visited who are just like, if you'd have told us we are going to have a bearded man from Chicago 5 years ago in our house, we've been like, no way. Uh, wonderful people who've been nothing but treated me great and made me feel loved and supported. But interestingly enough, on the flip side, my faith-based cartoons have the largest that audience is generally people who would lean way more towards a progressive Christian faith view, a democratic viewpoint. And it's always been funny juggling these two crowds on social media because um, they don't know how to read me in the sense of like, some of my faith-based cartoons may challenge more traditional worldviews
Hmm.
Hmm.
of faith, and some people laugh and are able to get a good laugh out of it, and some people are upset, they get angry, they're like, how dare you write something
Right.
about that. And then of course the progressive side, you're like, oh, this guy, I really resonate with him, but now he's holding a dead animal that's bleeding out his face, and like,
Right.
what the heck. And I've
What?
had people come after me on social media like, I got on here because you were writing cartoons about Jesus, and now I'm seeing like a head of a rat blown off, and
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you
well,
can't please everybody in public.
oh no, yeah,
And where do you come up with some of these titles like "But Dialed by Jesus"?
but
And
that
that's
that Jesus, yeah,
right, right,
yeah. Well, the funny thing was is my wife, when I just did my last book, the short stories. My wife Amy was giving me a hard time because she's like, well, your first book was called "Does This Arrow Make My Butt Look Big?"
right.
The second book was called Butt Dialed by Jesus. She said, could we break the butt theme, like
Right.
we just not have anything to do with butts, and the actual working title for my short stories for most of the time I was writing it was called Adult Spankings. And Amy was like, please, please do
Here
not
we
use
go, bud
that.
again.
Yeah, she's like, we got to break this butt thing. I don't want you being known as the butt guy. Just
A-
so.
Amy keeps you on the straight and narrow pretty good, huh, Spike?
Oh yeah. We were doing like a little marriage prompt thing. We were traveling together. We'd gotten a card game that gives marriage prompts, and it was like, well, where would you be if your partner wasn't in your life? And I was like, prison,
Right.
homeless. Amy definitely has kept me from a lot of bad ideas. So
Talking about your latest book, hello, my name is Jesus Peoples.
yeah.
Your short stories, I know that you give away a lot of cartoons to people, whether it be at Enterprise or
Mhm.
the chief of police.
Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah, yeah.
that was a really funny story. Would you mind touching base on that whenever you presented the cartoon to the
Sure.
police?
Yeah, well, one of the things that, and I'll be honest with you, is for me with cartooning is that I'm a person who loves to meet and connect with new people, and
Right.
I don't care what walk of life, as long as you're just a decent human being and a friendly person. I had a friend of mine a while back say, "I hope I live longer than you so I can be at your funeral. I just want to see all the different types of people you have like made friends with." But living in Chicago for 40 years, up until about 7 years ago, I really didn't have much interaction with the Chicago police. And I know, and it's weird because a lot of rural people I know, like, well, I know my police, chief, and I know my, sheriff, and they're all really good folks. And, there's definitely a different vibe in Chicago. There's up until probably about 8 years ago, I really had never had much of a positive experience with Chicago police officers. There's definitely a us and them mentality. They definitely, and obviously now I get it. But at the time, having had some interactions that just weren't very positive, it just was like, and as a law-abiding citizen, it was just like, wow, I'm staying clear of these people.
Right.
God had other plans, but basically through a series of events, my wife and I were looking for a new church to attend a Sunday service, and we found this place, and we walked into this church, and everything in the lobby was written in Spanish. And I said to my wife, "How well did you research this church? Because no
Yeah.
hablo español, And they, we walked in, and it was an all Hispanic church, and everything was in English. And that wasn't actually the big shocker for us. The big shocker was that the pastor and half the congregation were Chicago police officers. And we walked in this church, and Amy and I have never felt more welcomed. I mean, these people just treated us like they didn't even know who we were, and they made us feel super welcomed and like brothers and sisters in Christ. And we attended that church for about 7 years, but during that event, I started thinking about like it opened my eyes to hearing what these guys have to face every day, and
Right.
some of the female officers too there, and like that's a horrible. So I started drawing cartoons for them as like in a way. Most cartoons that if you look up police cartoons, it's pretty disparaging against the police.
Sure.
But I was drawing cartoons about things that they have to face on a daily level, and they would come to me and say, "Oh my gosh, how did you know that's something we struggled with?" Or "How did you know?" And I was like, I don't, I probably God just gave me some wisdom and insight at the moment. So then I was, several years later, I was at a picnic, and some Chicago officers had showed up. They had been invited to come attend the picnic in uniform. And again, this is at the height of, in context, this is the height of the insanity in our country shortly after George Floyd's murder, and
Mm.
everyone's just up in arms, and there's a lot of division, a lot of anger and frustration. And of course, the Chicago cops are under a lot of pressure and stress. And so I walked over to these officers, and they're not used to people. Anytime somebody approaches a Chicago police officer, they get on guard because they don't know, like, is this person a threat? Is this person going to start
Sure.
insulting us? Or do they need some help with something? But I used to walk up and, with my smartphone, I said, "Hey, I draw cartoons for some friends of mine in the 12th district. I want to show them to you." And these guys started laughing. They're like, "Oh my gosh, these are hilarious!" And one of the officers like, "Could you send me these? I'll give you my cell phone number." And I realized he was the commander of the 19th district, and Chicago's broken up into districts. So this guy was the head
Right.
honcho of the district we were in, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this is the big guy here." And so he even said to me, he said, "Oh, if you ever get a chance to draw one, I'd love to have one for my office." And I was like, "Sure." And well, a couple weeks later, I texted him and said, "Oh, I got a cartoon here," and I sent him a screenshot. He goes, "Oh, that's amazing," and I said, "I'll bring it down to the office for you." And um, he said, and it was just this, again, my wife laughed at me. She's like, "How do you get into these situations?" But it was completely unplanned. It wasn't like I was like, but he's like, I'll be on at 6. I said, okay, we'll come down. Amy, I'll drive down. And he gave me the address. And this particular precinct isn't far from, it's about 3 blocks away from Wrigley Field
Yeah.
in Chicago. And so I'm driving down there and I'm looking for parking. And I say to him, I text him and said, hey, we're just trying to find parking, but it's a little difficult right now. He goes, oh, well, I'm actually at the corner of Clark and Addison, right in front of Wrigley Field, the famous corner there. And I thought, and he says, yeah, you just drop it there. And I'm thinking, like, oh, he must be just sitting in a squad car by himself. We'll drive up, hand the cartoon. I have this little cartoon, this little art case that I carry my stuff in. Um, we pull up to that corner, and there's like 80 cops in riot gear, horseback. Like, it looks like it's about a battle about to go down. And
Yeah.
we look to our left, and there's a giant protest coming down Clark Street. And a normal human being probably would have just kept driving. But I
Nope.
stupidly parked my car across the street, got out, and started walking towards this crowd of officers with a briefcase in my hand. And I get about halfway there, and they all stop and they're looking at me, and I realized this was a bad choice because I'm thinking like, who's this bearded guy?
EOD. Yes.
What looks like a weapon in his hands. There, it just was like, this is a bad deal. And my wife's behind me, like, honey, let's get back in the car. And just then, I hear this deep booming voice, "Hey, Spy, come over here!" And it's the commander. And through the crowd, he's waving at me, and I'm handing him a cartoon. But again, it's the height of all his tensions, and he's trying to yell over the crowd, saying, "Oh, this guy's got this really funny cartoon. You got to see it." And he's showing all these officers the cartoon and they're dying laughing, but he's like, okay, we gotta get back to work, Spike, see you later. And I mean, it's like I'm running out of this crowd because they're about to face this protest. And
Onslaught. Right.
my
When,
wife's like, how do you get in these situations, honey? Like, this isn't normal, and but and him and I have stayed in contact through the years. And um again, it's one of those things, if you'd have told me 7, 8 years ago, oh, you're going to be friends with, and now he's been promoted to deputy chief of police,
wow,
this individual. So it's like, if you'd have told me 8 years ago, oh, you're going to be friends with the deputy chief of Chicago police, I'd be like, yeah, no way. But
man,
he's on speed dial.
that's just one of the amazing stories that whenever I read that, I was like, I gotta talk to Spike. I gotta talk to this guy. He's got so many great stories in that book. And
Uh-huh.
the real short stories are so interesting. And man, what a diverse life you're living,
Yeah,
100%.
getting to talk with so many people, not only in America, but foreign countries, and
yeah,
your experiences there, and your giant Boone and Crockett rat that you were after. People just won't believe some of the stories that are
yeah.
your life.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that I've told people, and it's hard for them to believe this, is and this is where I really believe in my faith, and I have to continue back into the fact that I serve and worship a loving and creative God, is that none of the significant things I've ever done in my life I planned for. If you'd have
Correct.
taken a 16-year-old kid and said, okay, on a sheet of paper here, you write out what you want to do in your life,
Yep.
man, I would have shot so low. And um, the fact that I've been just celebrated 36 years of a blessed, loving marriage, um, that I just can hardly believe I have been involved in, just being married to somebody who's so wonderful and has treated me better than I deserve. Um, and then even with, like, Greg, you're alluding to the rat thing. Like, the funny thing was, I never would have thought about hunting rats in Chicago until about 7, 8 years ago. Our organization has a 10-story building, and
Hmm.
due to some construction in the neighborhood, there was a bunch of old buildings that were knocked down, and the basement in our building got inundated with, like, Moses plague level rats. I mean, it was just a amount of
Wow.
rats in there. And the building manager came to me and said, "Hey, we know you're a hunter. Could you help us out? Because we've tried traps and poisoning, and nothing's happening. Nothing's working." And it was this light bulb moment for me. It's like, I've hunted coyote and deer and turkey and all these other animals all over the country. But
Right.
yeah, I've got this target-rich environment in my own basement here, and up to that point, I knew little about hunting rats, and just like hunting all these other animals, I made every stupid mistake. Every and people think, oh, it's just a silly little rat you're hunting after, and I'm like, well, wait until you try hunting a rat that knows it's being hunted.
Right.
Exactly.
It's almost as bad as a mature buck. Like
Yeah.
I've been in basements with big rats that know I'm there and they're not going to come out. I don't care
Right.
what kind of bait, how long you sit down them. I've sat there for hours and hours and hours um and so it was kind of one of those things like the Lord provided this funny thing for me, like, oh well, here's some. If you're not getting a chance to go out of state to hunt, well, why don't you hunt these rats in your basement? Well, I started posting pictures, and I didn't know how people would respond. I mean, people just look at it like, oh, gross, it's a rat, or it's whatever. And that's the funny thing, guys, is that my hunting buddies all around the country who've been following my hunt cartoons thought it was the greatest thing in the world. They were like, "Oh my gosh," and they couldn't wait for the next video or the next picture or the next story because it was like. And to me, I just thought it was hilarious that it's blossomed this thing where people, even on the street in Chicago, who aren't into hunting, will go, "Oh my gosh, it's the Rat Man," and
Right.
they follow the rat stories, hunting rats. And um, recently got an email and did in a Zoom interview with one of the doctors who works at Brookfield Zoo. I mean, I'm sorry, Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago here, which is a big deal. It's a big zoo, and but they reached out to me and said, "Oh, we've been having some rat issues, and your name came up, and I don't know how they got it or who gave it to them, but um, they wanted some information on rat hunting, and they said we don't know if we've met anyone who's spent as much time in alleys and in basements as you have hunting this creature, and that's just the hunting aspect. You guys know is if you're committed to going after an animal, whether it's a deer or turkey or
Right.
coyote, it's there's so much involved in learning about that animal, about understanding its environment, its cycles, it's the way it lives. It's not just a haphazard thing. You just show up with an air rifle and you're popping
Right.
rats. So it's but again, like I said, it's just one of those things that's evolved into this crazy thing that I would never have planned.
You can't script this stuff, man. If we
Absolutely.
just follow where God's leading, man, it opens up doors we never even thought of.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Greg and I get it, Tim. That's
Yeah.
the kicker is we didn't script our life. Everything I thought I was doing, God made a change. He didn't ask my
Yep.
opinion. He just went with the flow, and it's turned out so much better than I could have ever scripted it for myself.
Yeah. And that is again that is what I tell people is that and even after being a person who's followed God and seen His work in my life, yeah, I'm still embarrassed 40 years later. Sometimes I still get anxious about like, well, what's going to happen with or what's going to, and I have to remind
Sure.
myself again and again, God's always been there and He's always done way better than what you thought, and there's no
It's just
reason to
our
be
fleshly
anxious.
stuff, man. We all
Oh,
go through it.
totally.
It's
Yeah.
difficult, but it's always funny. In the end, you're like, what was I even worried about?
Oh,
But
absolutely, absolutely, yeah, and so for me, it's with the cartooning and with the short stories. I had a friend of mine who wrote me, and she kind of nailed it on the head for me. She just said, your book is kind of like a um, 300-page track. It's like you're a testimony of like using these short stories, but really you're pointing again and again and again. And I honestly, I didn't sit down to do that. I just had been told by people like, "Oh, you got a lot of great funny stories. You should write them sometime. Sit down and write them." And um, I'm a storyteller, I'm not a story writer. And when I first started writing these stories, I told my wife, and I was like, "Oh, I'll have this done in 6 months, and we'll be have this book done." And she kind of smiled patiently and just kind of laughed a little bit because we actually went through 10 edits, rewrites of this book because she's a super stickler about like every punctuation and misplaced
English
modifier.
major, right there.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and there's
Yeah.
things I didn't even know existed. Like, what's a misplaced modifier? Um, um, and so I'm thankful again. If you look at it like, okay, God went before me because not only did He provide me with an amazing wife who loves Him and loves me,
Yep.
but He knew one day I'd want to write a book on short stories, and who do I marry? Somebody who happened to be
An English
a high
major.
school English teacher, and so it's
Yep.
like. Um, I looked at what it was going to cost me to hire an editor to edit my book, and there's no way. It was like it was as expensive as a thermal scope. I was like, yeah, no, I'm going to use that money towards a thermal scope, not towards an editor.
Yep.
Um, and so I was just super grateful that I had somebody who was willing to be patient enough and sit down with me and go through all the stuff. And there was times it was frustrating. I felt like I was back in seventh grade English class, and um, but and my hope and prayer is that people through these stories not only get some good laughs and enjoyment, but um, they see that loving God and that
Yes,
person
sir.
who, because that's what the whole, to me, the whole Bible is about. Is the reason why the Bible exists is it's stories to say it's pointing towards the God we serve and the God we love, and that's why
Sure.
these stories from the Old Testament are shared and shared and shared. As Jewish faith has said that through story, the power of stories is where we're remembering who our Creator is, and yeah, Amy, you warned me ahead of time too, because you guys are both men of faith. There's stories in there you would read and go, absolutely. But my wife said there's going to be people who are going to think you're a total liar, like you're
Right.
totally making this stuff up because it just doesn't happen. And the funny thing is, there's stories I didn't put in there, or I had to kind of like slim down on some of the craziness that happened, just because I thought I just don't think people are going to believe some of this craziness, But
Mike always says it's a God wink. That's one of
absolutely.
Mike's statements. And Mike and I have been friends for a long time, and he's actually brought me closer to faith. And is people that have high level spinal cord injuries. We get to talk with a lot of different people around the country and hear their experiences. And when I was reading some of your short stories and your experiences, I think what a life you have and how open you are to helping people and kind of
Right.
setting and I know you don't try to set examples for people to follow, but how we can be better men every day in our life
Absolutely.
just by taking the time to talk with people or see things from their perspective, like you seeing things from a law enforcement perspective that you never really thought that you would before, and some of the
Yeah.
people that you've reached out to. And it's just kind of an amazing story. And I hope a lot of people purchase that book. It's really a good read.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And like I said, it's been interesting for me because we live in a country that's so, and it's just getting worse every day, so polarized.
Hmm.
Right.
And even in my own community and in my own, people at circles and stuff, I have, people are just becoming more and more amped up. But, one of the things that I find interesting is that we read the Bible and Jesus told stories and they're called parables, but
Parables.
he
Right.
told stories. They because we've heard them since we were little kids, and they because we're Western culture, they've become homogenized. But like one thing I was recently thinking about was how much we label people and we look at people through label stuff. And I was thinking about the story about the Good Samaritan and even the phrase, like for us right now, to hear the word Good Samaritan, just as a warm heart feeling, that's just a great thing, Good Samaritan, We've used this term as a way to say that's a good guy, that's a good person. But back in Jesus' times, when he was saying that to the audience he was speaking to, the word good and Samaritan would never have been in the same sentence. The Jewish people did not like the Samaritans. And for him to be speaking to the Jewish people and saying, let me tell you about this story. And if you think about that story translated into today's culture, it's like instead of the Pharisee or the other guy, the Sadducee, I think it was, who walked away from the wounded man. It's like think about your political parties. It's like a Republican was walking down the street, or a Democrat. Who shows up? It's the person that in this audience that no one likes. It's the bad
Right.
character, and it's like
Right.
a Samaritan,
Here comes
and
Barabbas. Yeah.
yeah, and you know, so for me, it's like when I look at people who are trying to find their righteousness and identity today, I get dismayed because, and that's one of the things why with the faith-based cartoons, I try to challenge a little bit of the um, people who find their righteousness in their politics, whether it's the left or the right, is that
Right.
really our righteousness comes through Christ only. Um, and I have my political opinions and feelings, and I
Sure.
wouldn't negate that, but I'm still called to love even people I strongly disagree with. That love doesn't mean I affirm their viewpoints or whatever, but they and again, like I said, I just am always shocked who God brings into my life. So this isn't in the book, but about 8 years ago, we ended up having to sell this piece of property. Our organization had to sell this piece of property that we owned. I did all my hunting and fishing and and it was just this place was heaven on earth for us. And I wasn't really sad when we sold it. Because I felt like I had had 20 years of something I didn't. Most people don't get. Like I kept
Right.
thinking, like, we're really blessed to have this. I mean, I was sad we were losing it, but I also knew I'd gotten a chance to experience something that most people don't. But one of the things I started doing was going down to. I live less than a mile from a local harbor here in Chicago on the lakefront, and it's a big fishing spot, and it's a place where a lot of people just walk around and hang out if it's a beautiful afternoon or evening, and there's a lot of Chicagoans down there. I started going down there with my fishing pole and a backpack and a net, and I would be fishing and never. I just went down there to go fishing, but I have had so many ministry opportunities where people walk up to me, and who generally it is, and I've been shocked by this, is Muslims will walk up to me and start talking to me about fishing, and people from the Muslim community, and I know it's the beard. They think the beard is just super like legit. And
Yeah.
I've had there's a few guys. I posted a story a while back on Instagram of a in the fall in Chicago, the salmon come into the harbors to spawn. So like starting September and October, you go down there and you're fishing. It's one of those like a fish of 1,000 cats, or maybe even 10,000 cats, because they're not biting out of hunger. They're biting out of they don't want anything in their territory. So you
Right.
just have to randomly get a lure in front of one of their faces, and they'll hit it. And when a king salmon hits that rod, it's a life changing moment. I mean, it's definitely just exhilarating. So one of these a few years ago, a couple of these Muslim guys walked up to me and asked me if I could teach them how to fish, and I was like, sure. And they had some equipment. I was helping them out with some lures and showing them some techniques and getting to know these guys. We would, occasionally call each other ahead of time, say, hey, I'm going to be down at the harbor, meet you down there. And about a month ago, I was down there with these guys, and they were just really bummed they had yet to catch a salmon. And after so many, I was like, that's part of the game. It's just suffering. And I hooked into one night, and I yelled to the guy Pasha. I said, "Come over here, grab this rod." And I handed it to him, and I think he was just so blown away that somebody would do that. Like somebody with
Right.
hand. That could have been my only salmon I was impossible to catch this year. And I handed it to him, and I was thrilled to do it. It didn't. I actually consider that a
Sure.
successful year, more than
Yes,
me
sir.
actually catching my own salmon and watching him fight this thing, and the funny thing is it ended up being the smallest salmon I ever hooked into, but it still put a king salmon still puts up an insane fight.
Right.
But he told me he sent a picture home to his parents, and they were so excited that he had met a guy in Chicago who had a big beard. Like to them, the beard thing is the cultural. And he said,
Sure.
well, he told them, oh, he's a Christian, and they go, we don't care. He's got an amazing beard.
Yeah. It's
uh,
one of those things, Tim, though. You think about it. If we spend any time in empathetic dialogue with anybody,
yes,
Chicago cops, people of
Yes,
different faith, we see that there's a lot of things that we have in common. We don't always
absolutely.
agree with everything, but
Oh
it
yeah,
opens up so much dialogue where God, if He
absolutely.
working, He can work
Yep.
in and through it, and it's His job to do delivery. We
Oh,
can't do it,
absolutely.
and so
Yeah, I
man,
cannot agree with you more on that, Mike. That is really good that you said that because that's one of the things that I realize with people who, especially as Christians, a lot of times we get under this thing like I've got to be the one
no,
who controls the situation, and we end up being way too overpowering, way too off-putting. And
yeah,
Scripture says, one person plants, one person waters, one person's. And for me, with these Muslim guys I've gotten to know, they're the ones who started asking me questions. They had never met a
sure,
Christian before. They didn't know what Christianity was about, and so they've asked me some questions. And we're good enough friends with each other now that we can tease each other too. So at the end of the night, when we landed that salmon, I turned to them jokingly and I said, "Well, you prayed to Allah, and I prayed to Jesus, and guess whose lure got bit?" And
yep, there you go.
they were high fiving each other, laughing, but I know that through that humor, there's a seed planted,
Yep,
Sir.
and I'm just treating these guys like normal human beings. And
yep,
again, I think that there's obviously it's not like laying my life down, but the Bible says there's no greater love than to, and I paraphrase it, there's no greater love than to hand your rod over to somebody with a salmon on the end.
yeah,
Those guys knew that that was something different, and for me, I would want people to see, like, in my life, is that I want to see you as a human being, not as an opponent or somebody who's different than me. And we may, like you said, we may have different viewpoints, and that may not come to fruition for years. But there's seeds planted. They know. They
correct,
met a guy who says he loves
correct.
Jesus,
Well,
who
there
hangs
you go,
hangs on
man.
the fishing pole.
It's all about being loving your neighbor and being
Yeah,
a fisher of men. And
for sure,
brother,
man. Exactly.
you're doing it, brother, and that's what it's about, is laying that seed. Now they're
Yeah.
asking questions, and that's where we want. Let the Holy Spirit take care of the rest.
Absolutely, yeah, I could not agree with you more. That's so true. And and they said, like I said earlier, I didn't plan to do that. I didn't
Right.
go down like, oh, now I'm going down to the harbor. I
Right,
wasn't
right.
trying to fake out Jesus. Like, okay, Jesus, I'm gonna do a little fishing, and I'm gonna talk about Jesus to people. I'm gonna hand out some tracts.
Yeah,
I was just literally down there fishing, and people would walk up to me and start talking, and God just had other plans, and I had to be obedient in that situation to go, like,
correct.
stop and talk to people and just be sensitive here, and also listen to them, like, what's going on in your life.
That's right. That's right. Well, Tim, the hour always goes by so quickly on our
Yeah,
podcast, but man, it was so good to talk with you and to actually hear some of the stories live and in person. And we so appreciate you coming on. Is there anything that you'd like to leave the people with that we didn't talk about today, or anything that we can do or promote for you? I'd love to have you back on again and
yeah.
talk more if you ever have the time. I know how
Oh,
busy you
definitely.
are, but it was just so good talking with you. I wondered if you wanted the last words on anything.
Well, I just for me, ultimately, I just want people to. We live in a world that's under a lot of stress and a lot of
Right,
ugliness, and for me, I see a lot of lonely, sad people in all walks of life. And there's a loving God out there, and He wants to have a relationship with you. And I'm proof in the sense that I at one point in my life was very deeply lonely, very lost,
right.
and looking for answers. And God has showed up again and again. And my life is continuously God showing up again. And it's not in the big parting of the Red Sea. It could be simply just something small in a day where He shows me His love and care for me. And I use that. I use humor. I never would have thought I'd be able to use humor, whether it's in cartooning or short stories, to share that with people. But
Yeah,
even in that, I'm just so thankful. God has allowed me, like, He's gifted me that opportunity to do that. So I'm
yeah.
blessed, and I appreciate the fellowship with you guys. And yeah, I look forward to more conversations down the road.
Tim, man, we truly appreciate it, brother, and it's been an awesome hour. Man, just getting to see everything you're doing, all the stories you're putting together, but seeing the life that God scripted for you, how
Yeah.
unique it is, and how exciting. I know the people are going to fall in love with it, and they're just going to want to hear more about it. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.